Good afternoon and welcome, friends and neighbors on the Sunshine Coast and in distant lands. Thank you so much for joining us on this virtual edition of MedTalks. Today's topic is managing COVID emotions. This virtual broadcast is brought to you by the Sechelt Hospital Foundation with help from very, very many people. Technical services by Visari Media Group. Financial support, as always, from our friends at the Sunshine Coast Credit Union. Shelley, Jody, and the team, very much appreciated. My name is Joanna Piros. I am on the board of the Sechelt Hospital Foundation, and I will be serving as your host for these weekly discussions, all of which we hope will cultivate our collective resilience. As you may have heard, last week the provincial government committed another $5 million to mental health programs and support, opening up more virtual appointments for anyone needing help. We will put up the link to that webpage live stream, along with many, many other links to important resources. So you can find those on the Sechelt Hospital website under the MedTalks banner. It is excellent news that there are going to be more supports for people, more ways to get mental health support time. And we're hoping that these conversations with the community will help to immunize you, if you will, by giving you insights into what is happening with all of us as we attempt to deal with the stress of this COVID crisis. We're very fortunate to have our amazing panel available once again to give you information and tools to stay mentally and emotionally balanced, and they will be taking your questions gladly towards the end of the program. Please use the chat feature to type your questions for the panel. We'll be collecting those and we'll attempt to answer as many as possible at around 2:40. Important note, you have to be logged into a Google account to be able to access the chat function in YouTube. I know, and we're working on making it easier, trust me on that. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. First, Dr. Raul Gupta works as an integrative medical physician, professional coach, and mindfulness instructor. Dr. Lisa Kitt is a registered psychologist who specializes in traumatic stress and related mental health injuries. And Dr. Marius Velgemuth is a consultant psychiatrist with Vancouver Coastal Health. He is the psychiatry lead for the Sunshine Coast, and he lectures at the University of British Columbia. Last week, we started this series by looking at anxiety because that was the main manifestation we were seeing in ourselves and in those around us. So today we want to look at a range of emotions that you may be experiencing. Lisa, you say yourself, you are a self-described emotion theory geek. So we're going to look to you for a primer on emotions. Give it to us, everything.
Okay, so 10 years of experience in 5 minutes or less. Here we go. I think it's really important to talk about emotions. And before we sort of talk about what we're noticing, the three of us, in ourselves, in our communities, in our patients and clients, and our friends, I want to give us a little primer on why talking about emotion is important. I really work with the belief that affect, emotion, is critical to who we are as human beings. It gives us a whole lot of information. And then if we really can sink into our emotional experience and unlock those particularly suppressed emotions, it really uncovers this beautiful adaptive tendency, this healthy healing capacity we have as human beings. So I think about emotion as almost that key in the lock. And we do a really good job in our society of avoiding and suppressing and not talking about emotion and not allowing ourselves to feel emotion. We tend to shame emotion. We're going through a collective trauma right now with COVID. And from a trauma-informed perspective, emotion becomes even more important. We're all feeling, or a lot of us are feeling, a whole range of affect, a whole range of emotion. And if our goal is to be resilient and come out the other end of this, thriving even, but certainly not in a lot of emotional pain, we need to pay attention to emotions. I often battle with people a little bit in a nice, caring, professional way to get them to understand and really sink into emotion. And it's not something that a lot of us are comfortable doing. How many people were raised in households or in communities where we were really encouraged and validated for that full range of emotion? Not many of us, unfortunately. That is changing, I think. So without going sort of down that science rabbit hole that I really do love, that's the geek part in me, I want two quick things. I want people to really know and understand that whatever you're feeling right now, and there's a whole gamut, it's totally okay. The worst thing we could do right now is to attach shame and blame on ourselves for whatever it is we're feeling. And we're going to talk about the range of emotions that we're noticing and feeling, and we're going to do that over several weeks, but we'll start on that today. It's really unhealthy to shame our emotions. And so I want to normalize what we're feeling. And I want to talk about the importance of feeling a full range of affect. Viktor Frankl, I'm gonna go back in time here a little bit, survived the Holocaust, and he was a psychiatrist in Vienna. And he came up with this term, tragic optimism. And what it means is people who are really resilient have this capacity to see hope and love, gratitude, joy, at the same time that they have the capacity to feel and feel deeply into those more difficult places of grief, sadness, horror, fear. And so that capacity, and my hands do this a lot as we're going to have these conversations, to have that full range of emotional experience is what we find in really resilient people, that they allow themselves to feel those things. So it might be fear and love. It might be, sadness and joy, or anxiety and empathy. And so whatever it is that we're noticing, to just allow it. At the end of this, if we have time, I think we will, to come back to some pragmatic, some skill-based skills around emotion, that we continue to talk about those things. One other piece is when we suppress or avoid or don't want to think about those emotional experiences that are hard, they double down on us. They fester, they get even harder and more difficult to deal with. And so we're going to talk as a panel over the next many weeks about the importance of just allowing those to move through our nervous systems and through ourselves, especially with other people and in connection. I think I'll leave the science piece at that for now and turn it over to my colleagues to maybe talk about what you guys are noticing in terms of emotions in yourselves, in the people that you're working with, in the community.
Absolutely. Well, what I wanted to start off with is just say, hello, Sunshine Coast. We've survived another week, and it's good to be back. It's wonderful to connect again and to talk about these matters that are really so close to the heart. One of the things that I wanted to start off with today is really tap into the broad range of emotions that we're seeing. Because initially, when we're confronted with adversity, the first thing that comes to mind is fear. And that is such a normal emotion when you're first facing adversity. But as time has moved on, I'm starting to see more of a balanced emotional range in people that I work with. I see, and Lisa, you're saying, it is sometimes it may seem like it's polar opposites, but it's not. It's a full range of expression. I see some optimism. I see hope, I see love, I see compassion, as well as fear and uncertainty and anxiety. But one of the first things I wanted to bring out today is the fact that we do have that balance, and that I'm seeing that more so these days than maybe a month ago. Raul, I'm not sure what you've been seeing in your practice.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of the same things that you're describing, and I just want to reiterate some of the things that I'm hearing you say, that for both of you, that I think are really important. And the part around giving ourselves permission to feel how we're feeling is really important, and also to give ourselves the compassion to kind of let those feelings happen in their own time. And sometimes they can be overwhelming, so even just letting ourselves pace through some of those feelings and not necessarily have to be with more than we're comfortable being with, I think is just maybe another piece I would add to that. And the things that you said, Marius, along with Lisa's beautiful introduction around emotions, I think it's really important that we hold those positive experiences like love and courage. I'm seeing a lot of courage from people to face really challenging situations. I'm seeing frustration, whether that's frustrations around other people and their behaviors, and underneath that, even actually a deeper level of anxiety and a fear for our own safety. When we're seeing other people make choices, and that sense of helplessness that can come up when we can't control other people's behaviors. We can't even necessarily control those that are in our family, let alone people in society. I've also seen some grief, and I've seen some sadness. I know for myself, actually, we've been exploring within my family just all the things that we're having to mourn because our lives were so radically changed in what felt like a heartbeat. And so there's all these things that, we might have been planning for, or experiences that we were hoping to have that suddenly disappeared. And then there's all the anticipatory grief. There's the grief of potential loss. And as we've had to meaningfully step into the future and think about all the things that might happen and plan for those things, we can get hijacked by deep anticipatory grief, deep anticipatory anxiety. And so even as Lisa was saying, these emotions are super healthy, and if they're suppressed or if we don't give ourselves permission to feel into them, they can actually overtake us and actually make it very difficult for us to move forward. So those are some of the things that I'm experiencing both within myself and those that I'm working with and working for.
That's really well said. It's hanging on your words, just liking to hear those things. I, as you talk about what you're feeling in your family, what I'm noticing in some of my family, but also in some of my close friends, is a different stage of this pandemic. It's no longer, I think some of us are no longer in the crisis, fight or flight stage of the shock of it all, and now have kind of come into this, what I'm often seeing is called this new normal. And I think it's a different place in your nervous system and a different place for some of us emotionally. And I'm noticing a weariness, a tired exhaustion. And I think that gets coupled with grief for sure. And so just I'm getting text messages from people saying, I'm just really tired. And I actually am seeing it in my children as well. I don't want to do anything today. My brain's not working. I'm really foggy. That's normal too right now. Right. And so some people are feeling a lot and some people are not feeling as much. And I don't want people to be concerned that that's not normal either. A flatness or a fogginess is also just part and parcel of a trauma response in our own nervous systems.
And then also something I'd like to add here, and I just lost connectivity a bit, but sometimes we don't feel emotions directly. Sometimes our emotions show up in behavior. So we might find ourselves doing things differently or acting differently, or maybe our family members are saying, I just don't know you as someone that would do something like that or say something like that. Remember that these behaviors also come forth from, and many of us are well versed at talking about emotions, expressing emotions, but many of us have a challenge. So one of the ways to monitor yourself and to look out for your family or whoever is in your house or close to you. When you pick up behavioral changes, be gentle, inquire in a loving way. These things have meaning. Behaviors have meaning. And so I wanted to just broaden that range of not only feeling, but also what do we see people do. Because this is also something that I've been seeing in the community. I see sometimes people basing their responses in a maybe somewhat more of a frustrated way. And at other times we see the fullness of love and compassion. Those are all driven by emotions. Oftentimes fear dictates behavior, and it's important for us to just recognize that.
Iris, I think that's such a crucial part of this, is that we can miss those feelings underneath the behaviors. So for instance, if somebody's getting really frustrated with another person who's not observing physical distancing, we may not actually be able to connect with the fact that person's feeling a lot of fear themselves, and maybe even having to, on some level, deny the reality because they can't handle that truth right now, because it's a bit too much for them to really even process. And so then, yes, you're right, we have to bring this level of tolerance and compassion for other people. Because one of the things that we can fall into is having emotions around our emotions, and having emotions around other people's emotions. And then it can become this vicious cycle where, before we know it, we're all kind of going for an eye kind of mentality. And that's our collective resilience.
Now is not the time for that. Well, exactly as you're saying, we should stage in the process we find ourselves that we should be so patient and tolerant. People are going to behave differently, and people are not all necessarily trying to be unreasonable sometimes. These are fear emotions driving behavior. So if you see someone struggling or someone looks like they're a little bit unreasonable, maybe be force yourself to be more gentle about your responses. We were not saying excuse unreasonable behavior, but I am reminding everyone that behavior is effective.
It's making me think of the long weekend ferry narrative that has been created or was created based on fear, right? Where there's a lot of fear around people coming to the coast and bringing COVID. And so you could see, or I was watching people's legitimate fear, and yet how it was coming across was pretty intense, and we were creating a narrative that wasn't necessarily true. There's some stats now that have come out. Last Easter, 22,000 people came to the coast, and this Easter weekend, less than 4,000. Hopefully people who lived here already. And so the narrative that was created was from that place of fear and anxiety. And I was hoping, as I was reading these comments, that somebody, and people were chiming in with maybe some more compassion or curiosity for why we were creating this narrative. Although understandable, it wasn't particularly helpful. Yeah.
And as you're saying that, I think the other part we might want to look into a little bit further is, and I think we'll do this in coming weeks, is around the really important function that frustration and anger plays, because that usually suggests something that's really important to us is being threatened.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a core emotion.
Yeah, it's a core emotion. So if we can feel into that, then that frustration and anger can actually help us realize, wow, there's something really important to me that's being threatened. But anger and frustration are not a great place to transform behaviors. They're a great initiator to help us understand what our values are, and they're a great place to start thinking, okay, where do I need to have some courage? Where do I need to advocate for things? And how can I do that in a way that's going to be most effective? Mm-hmm. And therefore we can channel some of those emotions into ways that hopefully are useful for ourselves and others.
As I hear you talking, it's all about awareness. I'll let you go, Marius. It's just, as you're talking, the importance of our own awareness in ourselves, and that's not an easy skill.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go, is when you find yourself reacting in a way that is maybe unusual or that is excessive to what you normally know, it is a real good place to learn more about yourself. Don't always be afraid of the emotions you're experiencing. If you have an intense emotion, stop for a second and ask yourself, well, you just said there are core components to our existence that are being threatened. It has meaning. Yeah. We can learn so much about ourselves and how we respond during these times of adversity. So when you find yourself reacting to a situation or someone, and the emotion is something that's not well known to you, pause a second and ask yourself, I wonder why. I wonder why this is happening to me. What might be the deeper meaning, underlying all of this? There's a wealth of knowledge about yourself that you can learn, and then in that, you will find that our behaviors and responses are really based on our subjective experiences and our own internal conflicts and strengths and weaknesses, and that'll translate hopefully into more compassion and seeing if you see someone else respond in a certain way, you can even ask yourself the question, I wonder what they might be facing. The only thing is not how it offends me, but what are they going through? Lisa, pick up on this.
Well, I love that piece around, as I listen, I'm hearing you be curious with yourself, right? There's just I wonder what's going on for me that I'm doing that. It's not a place of shame. It's not a place of judgment towards yourself. It's just this openness and a curiosity. I often with clients take a pretend magnifying glass or a floodlight and turn it inward, right? To illuminate from a place of curiosity what it is that might be going on that's driving behavior or driving thought to driving emotion. Yeah, I really like that.
It's pretty exciting. We learn our responses, we learn the community's response, we learn about the response in the world. I mean, we don't have any guidelines on how to live through an epidemic like this. We don't. So this is we're learning as we go, and it need not always be a bad thing. It can be a real good, encouraging process as well. Although we take it very seriously, the adversity, but there are different elements to this that we need to look at. Well,
yeah, as you guys were speaking, I was reflecting on sometimes what gets forgotten is just like the function of some of the more I'm going to call them negative emotions, even though they're not negative, but that they're more challenging. The function of them is to keep us alive. And so they have a lot of power. If you've done any reading of Rick Hanson's work, he has this wonderful analogy that negative emotions are a little bit like Velcro. They stick to us. And positive experiences are more like Teflon. They kind of just slide right off us and we kind of forget about them. And so we tend to focus on the negative experiences more than the ones that are positive. And this is not to say we shouldn't honor, as Lisa's been talking about, the more challenging emotions. Our way through them is to feel them. And at the same time, I think we can do our best to give some focus to that which is more positive. And I was thinking of an example I saw this week of somebody who was stuck in the fear of the future and feeling a lot of uncertainty, feeling a lot of loneliness, feeling a lot of sense that they were anxious about what was going to happen next. And as we explored really what was that about, they were able to say, what I really would like is to feel some self-assurance, some self-confidence, that I can handle whatever comes my way. And that's a very different emotion, an emotion of self-assurance. And so we could actually start exploring, well, what would self-assurance look like now? And they said, a few things. I could actually make a couple of phone calls that I initiate every day to connect with somebody. I can actually take the time to get out in nature, which actually gives me a sense of self-assurance because I can connect to the world around me. And that's something that I have the power to do. So I think supporting people to almost use what's coming up for them, but turn it into something that actually is a powerful, positive value or an emotion can be also very useful.
I'm going to add one little piece to that, and I think we should turn to our mindfulness exercise in a sec here. The science behind this positive, what we call positive, or the more joyful affects, and what we call negative, although I agree they're really functional and important. From an evolutionary perspective, I love this, and it's kind of a ripoff at some level, but the negative emotions, you're right, stick like Velcro, and the positive ones, we say and we think that for positive emotion to really stick and glue, we have to hang out in them. We got to really just settle into them and feel them deeply. So I use the term glue the glimmer. So I want everyone, all of us, and everyone listening and watching, to really notice when you're feeling a positive affect, to just slow down and stay there, savor the heck out of it, and really stay in it. Because biologically, we need more, 8 to 10 seconds, we think, to really have that land in our nervous systems and shift our neurobiology. So glue the glimmer, please.
Yeah, you know what? I am extremely passionate about the term neuroplasticity, and it is in a significant way connected to what Raul and Lisa has been just talking about, because our brains have the capacity to change. We used to think for many years that once you were in adulthood, your brain was done changing. We know that it's not true. Our brains continue to morph and learn new experiences, and as much as those negative emotions serve a purpose and they have to be there, it's for our survival and it's important. Spending time in the positive emotions will literally transform the neurophysiology of your brain, and that gets me excited. I feel like a kid getting a present every time I think about this, because we literally can transform how our brains work, and it is powerful. So during this time of adversity, as we're facing so many different things, remember one thing also. We always think, how are we going to cope with adversity? Everyone watching this today has already survived and is here today and have already coped with the adversity listening to this broadcast today. Forward to what am I going to be doing? How am I going to face this? Bring in that balance. Challenge your thoughts a little bit around some of your basic beliefs you may have.
That I'm so glad you brought up that word resilience around this, because there's that personal resilience that we each have. Like if we're here on this call, that means we've survived a bunch of challenges in our own life. And then we can even extend that historically to our ancestors, and literally thousands of years behind us within our genetic, psychological potential of surviving, of resilience. And we can remind ourselves, wow, we come from a deep place of shared resilience. And that, for me, actually gives me a lot of balm, a lot of soothing for the other challenging experiences we might be having.
That's essential because we need to acknowledge that. We need to have that in our minds the whole time. Every day when I work with people, I love working with people, and I always remind anyone I work with, remember how far you have come. Not taking away anything of the suffering. I'm not trying to neutralize anything. I am being very serious about our situation, but take some time and just acknowledge how far you have come. Mm-hmm. And what strengths you do have, because we're all a collection of strength and weakness. You know, it's not like we experience the full range. So acknowledge the full range.
I totally agree.
Something came up today, if I could just pop in with a question, something came up today. I was speaking to someone who said, I don't like going out anymore because I'm so sensitive to other people's emotions, which made me wonder about this whole notion of emotional contagion and how much are we being preyed upon, perhaps by picking up on other people's anxiety that may not even be our own. What about that? How do we protect ourselves from that? Mm-hmm. Or do we?
It's a thing. That's a real thing. Emotions are contagious. We talked about that a little bit last week. How anxiety is contagious, how happiness, joy, love, gratitude is contagious, fear, deeply contagious. I'm seeing that in some of my clients, some of my patients, those whose nervous systems are already fairly full, already in a place of arousal or anxiety, are just struggling in their own pre-COVID state. They have a really hard time boundarying themselves from other people. They're like sponges. Deeply empathic people can be like that as well. They feel deeply, they're very sensitive, and they can really take on other people's emotions. I like to work with people's boundaries to really know what's theirs and what's ours. But it is contagious. You go into Vancouver, you go into Sechelt, it's strange, it's eerie, it's odd, it's uncomfortable, it's anxious. And so to really hold yourself in a place of positive emotions with some good boundaries is really important and hard. It's not easy right now. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I would agree with you around that. I think the key part from what you said, Lisa, for me is boundaries, because it's such an important part for us to protect ourselves a little bit from those things that can very quickly take us over. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I've been doing, and one of the things I've been encouraging people that I work with, is to just take some time to notice who are the people that seem to naturally calm you, that seem to naturally provide a sense of hope, that seem to feel grounded, you feel grounded with. Mm-hmm. And then also be able to just listen to our own needs. You mentioned earlier, which I think is a really important insight, that most of us are feeling some fatigue now. Mm-hmm. Our systems have been on hyper arousal for weeks, and now there's this underlying fatigue that naturally is going to be with us. Mm-hmm. And now we're a little bit less immune, to use some of Joanna's language around this. So we have to kind of listen to our own body, and we're going to get into that when we do a mindfulness practice. We have to listen to our cues to tell us, are we even fit to be in other people's presence right now? Are we fit enough to protect ourselves? Is it actually time better spent to do what nourishes us on a deeper level? And that's challenging. You're right. It's really challenging to know those pieces, especially when we're being asked to isolate and there's such a strong biological instinct to connect with each other.
Mm-hmm. And it also picks up on last week's discussion on how we're using social media, because there's one place where if you want to be flooded by anxiety, spend some time on certain sites, So, Raul, you're saying a very accurate thing here is evaluate yourself, where you're at. Is it time for you? Are you healthy enough to do certain things? I want to add to that by saying that, remember, if you find yourself in a company, well, that may sound almost like prohibited today. So, but you find yourself where you are people and they are really affecting you.
We're getting a little dropping out there, Marius.
Time with those people, and then okay, let me see what I can do here.
This might be a really
better. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Better now.
Better.
Do I look slowed down?
Yeah.
If I look slowed down, believe me, it's only the signal.
Probably a lovely time to move into mindfulness.
Yes, let's do that.
Yes, let's do
Over to you,
that.
my friend.
Okay, sure. So I thought I might introduce a very simple mindfulness practice that can help us integrate what Marius and Lisa have been talking about, is this integration of what are we feeling, how is it showing up in our behaviors, how is it showing up in our thoughts, so that we have a way to take that courageous step to notice what's going on for us. And just like we've been discussing, that's going to give us hopefully a little bit more information, a little bit more resolve to know what we need next, what we might need to honor in order to serve ourselves and therefore serve others. So this is called the STOP technique, and I'll just walk us through the definition and then a very short practice so we have a chance to taste it. So STOP, S stands for stop, and that's really an invitation to take a pause from our usual conditioned habits of thought, patterns of thinking, our time travel, where we are visiting the future or going in the past, and actually a pause to see if we might enter in the moment. And then the T, much like we did last week, is an invitation to take a breath. And on a larger level, it's an invitation to relax, to let our shoulders relax, maybe let our jaw relax, any areas that we're holding some tension. It's really to remind ourselves right now that there's nothing actually to fight or flee or even to freeze from. That right now, actually, it's an opportunity simply to focus on being and be curious. And then the O is to observe and to open. And that's really opening up our senses to take in what's happening around us, take in what's happening within us. It's a great opportunity to feel into our bodies, and our emotions and our thoughts, and be curious. In a sense, we're kind of investigating the truth. Like a meteorologist might sense what's going on in the weather, we're kind of getting the sense of the patterns within us. And then the P part is to proceed into the moment now with a little bit more information, with a little bit more detail that we might make a more wise, more kind choice from. There's a quote from Louis Cozzolino, a psychologist, that says, "We are not the survival of the fittest, we are the survival of the nurtured." And I love that, because I think that speaks to really our ability to not put so much attention on doing and trying to get somewhere, but actually more function on how we're being in relationship with ourselves and other people. So if you're ready, we're going to do exactly that. We're going to continue together, stop as a starting place. And so it's an invitation to kind of just let yourself arrive. You might have already been planning what you're going to do after this call, or judgments about whether you like what we're talking about, or maybe even mourning some other experiences. So we're going to let all of that go for a moment and just see if we can tune into and choose to be here. We might have to do that over and over again in the next few minutes. And then the T part is to, again, take a few breaths, which might be down into your belly. You might choose to slow your breathing down a little bit, so really the exhalation is a little bit longer than the inhalation. And as you're doing that, it's also an invitation to just notice if you're bracing right now, like squeezing your hands or holding your back stiffly. And if there's a place where you could just soften your posture. We're kind of just telling our body that right now we maybe don't need quite as much armor as we've been carrying. So wherever softening is possible, just letting that happen. And now the O part is to start to open our senses and observe. So what might you observe? You could observe maybe your body and just where it feels most comfortable. For many of us, that might be in our hands or our feet, or with our breath, or anywhere else that you notice. And if you find places that are comfortable, even if they're small, that can be a nice place that we can return to if we notice some more challenging experiences even in the next few minutes. You could also observe even parts of your body where maybe you're feeling a little bit less comfortable. So as I'm doing that, I'm noticing my heart rate's up a little bit. I'm noticing my shoulders are a little bit tight. Kind of just making space to notice these different parts and not needing to change them or even analyze them or fix them. Just really acknowledge things as they are. It's this curious, kind stance. And we can start to, as we're doing that, feel into what might be some of the emotions that are visiting us right now. Our body can be a wonderful cue. So maybe there's a bit of anxiety that we're feeling. Either we can detect it in our breathing or our heart rate or our tightness. Maybe you notice kind of a slumping posture and maybe a feeling of sadness. Or maybe there's an overwhelming sense of joy or calmness or peace that you're feeling, or some combination. And again, if it's difficult, you could come back to a place of ease just till it feels wise to proceed. So we're kind of making kind choices all the way along. We can also notice our thoughts. So we can notice both what kinds of thoughts we're having. We could also notice even our state of mind. Open, closed, scattered, or curious. Are there thoughts that maybe are feeding into a sense of anxiety? Are there other thoughts that maybe are supporting us to feel some gratitude? So again, just noticing what's here. With no other purpose than simply to see, take a look, trusting that there's a part of us that knows how to hold all of this. And then as you're ready, the P part is to proceed. So we're going to take what information we've got, whether it's from our body, from any emotions or any thoughts that came up, and we're going to proceed with some compassion. What do we notice our system needs right now? What does this moment need? As I was tuning in, as an example, I noticed my lips were a little bit dry, so I'm going to have a sip of water in a moment. I noticed, just looking out the window, I noticed the sun shining everywhere except for where I'm sitting right now. So proceeding with compassion actually just feels like getting myself outdoors for a few moments. But noticing what's true for you. Maybe it's connecting with somebody that you've wanted to today, or giving yourself permission to have a nap. Whatever it is that actually feels like a kind gesture to honor whatever emotions you've been experiencing and what your state of being is right now. So I'll stop there and maybe just check in with the other panelists, anything you might want to share or deep around.
One of the things that came to mind for me during this exercise is we should be able to receive as much as we're able to give. People often find themselves dominant in one of the two, but now is the time for us collectively as a community and as a society, to receive those good things in the community, the positive words from others, the amazing, beautiful things we see happen all around us, but to also be an agent of being that to those people around you. And that is just a thought that just flowed through my mind as we were going into this time of meditation, which is so beautiful to think about. And it's so encouraging for me to realize that, because I've been seeing that. And this really is a good exercise for us to just think about those things that are worthy to be thought about.
That's lovely. I really appreciate the opportunity to slow down and then to notice what I notice as I slow down. So as a classic overfunctioner, and that's certainly how my anxiety shows up in overfunctioning, that came with more clarity. I can hear my kids wanting me to stop being a drill sergeant about cleaning the house or getting stuff done. And so just bringing more awareness to what those look like, right? Underfunctioning, overfunctioning parts of ourselves. And the other piece that came at the end was, as I listened to your lovely voice, just the sense of connection and undoing aloneness in my ear, listening to you was very, very connecting. And that soothed my nervous system even more. It felt very right, very good, very calm. So thank you for that.
Raul, you also mentioned we need to be aware of that space within ourselves that is actually holding us. And you know what? That's something I haven't thought about much in my life. But how valuable is that, to just be aware of that place within yourself that is holding you, because you are doing well, and we are coping, and we are being resilient, and we are suffering, and we are fearful, but yet we're held together in this unified entity we call me.
Human.
Pretty amazing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Jane, do we have some questions for our panel?
Several. So thanks for asking. From the Hospital Foundation here, we've been getting all sorts of calls and emails. And so let's just kick this off. There seems to be a lot of fearful projections and conspiracy theories popping up everywhere. Why are people suddenly so paranoid and believing that we're all being lied to?
People have a very fundamental desire in life, and that is to make sense of chaos. And I find when people are trying to make sense of things that we can't quite make sense of, that's when theories arise. That's when we start thinking about weird and wonderful things, because I so desperately need to have an understanding. Even if my understanding is not such a factual one, at least it's a form of an understanding. So I see that very much as part of the fear response. And I want to really motivate people not to buy into weird and wonderful theories for now. We are facing enough adversity as it is to layer it with additional layers of content that is just so far out. So I don't think it's serving much of a purpose, but I think it comes from that fundamental need to be in control. And if I can create a theory that can possibly explain the adversity, then I feel safer.
I think it's super well said. All I was going to say is anxiety shows up in interesting ways. Basically the same thing of what you're suggesting. Yeah.
Well, and I think I think a lot of our, when we do get anxious, we tend to revert back to our beliefs about the world. And so for those of us that tend to be more pessimistic or nihilistic, that's going to kind of flavor what we think is going to come out of this. And if we tend to be more hopeful, then we're likely to, anticipate a more positive outlook. And the reality is, none of us actually know how this is going to shake down. Like, how can anybody possibly have the guile to think that they know what's going to happen? I mean, we can't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone months down the road. And so part of me is like, well, we have to recognize all of us are trying to find a way, as Maris was saying, to make meaning and to feel a sense of control. And I think this may not be all that helpful, but we have to recognize there's a lot of stuff here we can't control. Like, there's so much right now that is not within our power. Our power is really to choose what we pay attention to, and to choose where we put our energy, and to what degree we tune in to ourselves and our needs and the needs of our loved ones. And I think that's what I would encourage people to do, is to really focus your attentions on those places that serve you best.
We have another question. What can you say about COVID's impact on vulnerable children and or family members who are now living in a restricted and sometimes dangerous household? What to do and how to get help if they are suddenly on lockdown?
Yeah. Who wants to take that? I mean, I can just about this. We know domestic violence rates are up in my connections with the police and some of the domestic violence shelters. And I certainly worry about children who are not living in safe environments. This is I think our community needs, and I know we are at some level, but start to think about these kinds of issues. I was talking to some teacher friends and urging them to not worry about education right now, but be like social workers and just care for children. Sometimes the teachers might be the only ones to reach those kids. And as a community, to look around from a place of compassion and see how we might be able to reach out. Maybe we know the people down the road were in struggle before this. And so what are some ways we can be supportive just in general? But this is an important question and a harder one, I think, to address. And that's going to have some, as a trauma therapist, I think there's going to be some significant mental health fallouts for some people because of this time.
It's about that awareness, Lisa. I agree with you. That awareness of the fact that these things will be happening, that there will be vulnerable people, there will be children in households where parents really are not coping that well. And it's important to remember with children that they do not verbalize well. Whatever they're going through shows up in play, it shows up in behavior. So it's about being sensitive and reaching out. I don't think it should be a punitive measure. We know that there is a boundary between what is legal and what is not legal. You know, when behavior really goes above and beyond what is acceptable standards of what we have in our community, then that becomes a different question. But within the realm of just struggling emotionally, I think that is a very important thing. Being aware and reaching out when you see struggle, and remembering with the children that it may look differently, it may look very differently.
Makes me want to support parents even more who are struggling, because how we parent and how we are with our children matters so much. And yet it's so hard right now, even not being in a place of vulnerability myself. It's hard to be with kids all the time. Beautiful and hard.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys have said and really said it beautifully. And I've seen that with some of the parents that I know that are tremendous parents and just how difficult this is. So I love what you guys said. And just to reiterate, I think if we can support parents to be their best selves by connecting with them, by offering support psychologically from a distance, if there's ways that we can work together as a community to find resources. One of the things I love about the Sunshine Coast is we are pretty amazing at adapting and noticing where there's gaps and doing the best we can with the resources we have to meet those needs. And so what it often requires is for us to advocate where we see some of those gaps and work together to find some solutions.
There's another piece here that came up for me in the last question as well, and it's around our responses to things we see. In times of fear and scarcity, we tend to come at people with judgment from our own place of fear. And so, you know, you may not be loving what you see in your neighbors as they parent their children, but to really try to not have judgment. I was working with a client last week who has been clean off of drugs and alcohol for 7 years, struggling right now. He's still clean, but he's really struggling because he doesn't have those same coping strategies open to him in terms of connection with other people. And so he's doing some things that people are having judgment about. Still clean off of drugs and alcohol. Congratulations, bud. But it's a struggle. And so for us to really watch our own judgments, we don't know what's going on for people. They might be doing the very best they can. And if we can soften our judgments, we will have more empathy and be able to reach out more and care more.
I'm just going to jump in for a second to remind people, if they came in a little bit late to the conversation, you are more than welcome to send questions to our panelists through the chat feature on YouTube. But a reminder, you have to be logged into a Google account to do that. Sorry about that, but that's just the way it works for the moment. So by all means, feel free to send more questions as we continue our conversation. Have another one?
Panelist, what do you all do for self-care? You are the helpers to others. So how do you make sure you stay mentally okay to keep going?
Good question. Who wants to start?
I can jump right in because I am mostly excited about life. So we all have to find within ourselves as meaning. What are we passionate about? What makes us tick? And for me, it's always been, the being connected in your faith community. It to me is absolutely essential. Being connected to nature is fundamental. And then I have a very, very busy 2.5-year-old running around the house, and just investing time in that beautiful neutral brain that is a canvas for life is about to happen in that neural network is something that I love dearly. So for me, combining those things just brings me so much joy and peace, and it just gives me the strength I need every single day to just be with people that are suffering. And I am so passionate about these things. So let me not take another 10 minutes. Roll.
Sure.
I love that, though.
I love the question. Thank you for asking. And, 2 words came up for me as I was hearing the question, which was, for me, what works is compassionate curiosity. And what I mean by that is every day's been different. I just can't rely on knowing exactly how I'm going to feel. And so I'm trying my best to give up expectations of myself and really opening up to curiosity and seeing, okay, what serves me in this moment? What serves me today? And how might I stay connected? As Marius was saying, I think connection is such an important part. And that for me means connected to myself first, connected to my body and how it's doing, connected to my mind and how it's functioning, connecting to my heart, and being willing to see if I'm in a stuck place, that maybe what I really need is a conversation with a trusted person who can help me process that. So that compassion part is really important for me, because if I just stay curious and I open up, I've been finding some pretty ugly things within me that it's easy to fall into judging or blaming myself for. But if I bring that compassion, I can much more likely turn towards it. And I generally find that whatever I choose to do next is a nurturing activity. Whether it's taking myself for a walk, whether it's, I have my parents living with me right now for the next, I could say next 3 or 4 months, but it could be 3 years, I guess, who knows. But it could be taking my dad for a walk, or it could be playing cards with my family, or having a bath. That's been one of my surprisingly new strategies to support kind of getting through these challenging times.
This question could be an hour or 4 for all of us. I hadn't thought about what I wanted to say because I was so deeply listening to both of you with this huge smile on my face. It all resonates. I think for me, what's critical is awareness, is self-awareness, to know how I am, how I'm doing, how my nervous system is. And from that place of awareness, which is a skill and takes work, but it feels so critical, really, in terms of my own self-care. From there, I can decide what I need. YouTube Live freaks me out. I'm pretty introverted by nature, and so I spend a lot of time alone. The forest behind me here, I have a 5K loop that I do most days in the forest with my dog, and I just feel so much calmer, and I process a whole lot of emotions in that back forest. I've been known to yell at trees and cry in the forest and just do whatever it is, allow with compassion, whatever it is my body needs to do. I also, one of the first words out of my mouth was going to be meaning. And so I agreed to this kind of conversation because I find deep conversations about mental health and self-awareness and self-care just so stimulating and life-giving. It's what makes my world go around. And so it's a combination, particularly I think with this and these two in particular, because it's with connection. I feel the connection as we have these conversations, and I think I can almost feel the connection to the audience. And I know that sounds super flaky, but I want this collective resilience, and that really is nurturing and fueling for me. That's a long-winded conversation.
Well, and actually, just before you go on, I feel like it's an important piece to add, which is one thing that really works for me is to notice where I can authentically contribute.
Yeah.
Because what you said, Lisa, really is an important piece, is I think all of us want to serve in some way in these challenging times.
Yeah.
And so is there a way that we can give that speaks to our strengths, that honors our limitations,
Yeah.
and that we can do sustainably over time? And that's what I find is really helpful for me, is to find that sweet spot where I can give but do it over time, so that I'm not putting myself at risk and therefore, not available next month.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
One more question?
Sure, and this goes to the meditation exercise. What is the answer if you get to the P, Raul, and you can't proceed? If there's nothing but numbness?
Mm.
Such a great question. Thank you, whoever wrote that question. So, I know Lisa may have some things to say about this too, because numbness, that's in some ways a sign of our survival system kicking in. Numbness is actually a very important trauma symptom. I don't mean that you're traumatized, but actually a survival system that when we're shutting down a little bit, and we all do that when we feel a little bit helpless. And it's actually a normal, healthy thing for us to do when we're feeling helpless. So the first thing to say is, wow, I can notice the numbness. Proceeding with compassion might just be, wow, I'm obviously feeling a little bit terrified, or I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable that I can't face this. And compassion might just be, I'm going to give myself a break today. And I'm going to connect with somebody who lessens the numbness. Or I'm going to just proceed by being curious. What happens through not judging this?
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of ways we can proceed with compassion, which can also include doing nothing other than being kind to ourselves and being patient. So I just want to finish by saying I really want to normalize that numbness is it's a sign that your nervous system is actually working well. It's not something to be worried about, but it's actually a sign that your system's working well. And now we just want to support it in any way we can to feel more safe, to feel more secure. And any measures we might take to move in that direction will be helpful.
That was beautiful.
Lovely. Mm-hmm. Lovely. Thank you all. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Marius. Thank you, Raul. I can't believe an hour has gone by. You are all so brilliant and so wonderful to listen to, and calming and soothing. So many great messages in there, and I'm sure we'll get lots of feedback and subsequent questions. So thank you all. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in today. And also thank you to those of you in the community who have made such generous contributions to the Sechelt Hospital Foundation's COVID Emergency Fund. If you are in a position to give, and we get it, not everyone is. If you are in a position to give, please do. And please know that all of those donations go directly to support equipment and personal protective equipment and other supports for frontline healthcare workers and support staff. We do also have for you, and this is just one page of several, we have a huge resource, a great directory of resources for mental health support for the community. That's going to be on the Sechelt Hospital Foundation's website, just below the live video link. Once again, thank you to Vasari Media Group for technical services, the Sunshine Coast Credit Union always for their financial support, and to all of you for being part of this important conversation. Next week, we look at and grief. And in the meantime, please stay well, stay connected, and we'll see you next week.